This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:07 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast, and you're on Ask a Rabbi.
Hi there, everyone. Good morning. It is easier to, I noticed that as I was listening to newscasts this past week. It's easier to hear you. I knew that anyway. Without the mask. Give me 1 second here to bring folks on. And we're going to do a live video here, too. And here we go. I tried to, it used to be that I could do it on one and share it. It's not letting me do that. So here we go.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. The joys of it all. But the problem is that the angle is really not good on the second one. All right.
A woman never lets a camera shoot up.
No, it's not good for anybody.
No, it's not good for anybody.
It's not good for anybody, and that's part of why I try to aim it this way. And, I really need this up here.
Yeah, that's right.
But I can't just sit and hold that.
Well, you know what? They have those little
I'm
stands?
going to have to look for one of those.
Staples has got them.
Staples has got them? Okay.
Yeah, they have entire...
We'll take a look.
They have entire kits now that,
that you can hold it.
Yeah.
So everybody who's watching this is getting seasick because I've been moving it back.
It's like a little mini tripod.
Yeah. So you know what? Hand me that wet one's over there. I'm going to use a prop. Anything that I can prop it up on. There you go. So.
Okay.
Yeah, we're going to try this and see if that works. Oh, it's getting dangerous.
It's getting real dangerous now.
Yeah, it probably is. But maybe I can lean it. No, that's not going to work either. All right. Okay. You know what? We're going to do that. Make it more stable. All right.
I see pending disaster here.
It could well be. People are probably getting seasick on the one. That's life. You know what, folks? I'm going to just turn that one off and we'll just have the one.
Well, we had IRSC in here on their normal Small Biz Florida show, and Ann Decker from the foundation at your college was in here talking about amazing numbers of scholarship opportunities for kids at, not kids, anybody.
Anybody.
At IRSC. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that, and there's the Complete Your Degree program through Florida. Florida's got a number of really good educational programs, and I think people really do need to avail themselves of that big time.
Yeah, you look at the facility, and of course, we just got the press release from the college. The new advanced manufacturing is there. It's on the books now, and I know Dr. Massey has been fighting with the state to fund it. And the one thing Ann said last night, apparently they're not, but the foundation's going to raise the money. So it's like, okay. We can do this, and they've done it before, and they'll do it again. She's built 13 buildings for the college since she's been there. So in the 12 years she's been there. So, hey, why not?
Yeah.
It's amazing. You guys do marvelous things there at that college.
Well, I hope so. And I think that, education, as we have seen, is really, really important. Cannot underscore how important that is. I'm gonna put a couple of things out there that some of the interesting things that I've seen this past week. So there was a Facebook post that I got a kick out of, which was some woman saying, if XXX wins, then I'm going to have to leave the U.S. I'm going to move to Hawaii.
That has to be a movie star or something like that. Oh, to Hawaii?
Yeah, which was like, first of all, excuse
that
me.
That would be a movie star.
No, that was an average person in Florida, and I'm like,
Florida, yeah.
Down, boy. I caught that. Yeah. So needless to say, some people tried to point out to her a couple of things, one of which was that Hawaii is part of the U.S. It's just not on the continent. Number one. Number two.
What's a continent?
Yeah. Well, hey, you'll like this one. There's an assignment in one of my classes for students to analyze a news article and find a fallacy in it.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, and there, it's like, which was kind of funny. I was describing this to somebody, and my husband said to me, "News shouldn't have fallacies." And I said, "That's true, but people commit them all the time." Right? News shouldn't have fallacies. But anyway, so this one student had taken some editorial piece and had talked about fallacies in it. And I said, yes, these are fallacies. You've labeled them incorrectly, but aside from that detail, it's an editorial. Somebody's giving their opinion. It's not intended to be fact. It's opinion. And people are entitled to opinions. They can be wrong, but they're still their opinions. And, that's the joy of the world. You can have opinions. And although I like to point out to people, you can have an opinion about whether or not a dog is pregnant, but the dog either is or isn't. Yeah.
Whoa.
But anyway.
That was deep.
So, what can I say? But anyway, so I commented to the person, the assignment is to pick a news article, not something off the editorial part of the... Well, how do I know what's news and what's editorial?
Yeah, here we go.
And I'm like, really? And then the comment went on, well, as my news article, I analyzed one of President Trump's speeches. Isn't that news? I said, well, the fact that he gives a speech is news. The content of his speech is his opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And, while there might be a wealth of fallacies, there isn't any public speaker or public figure who has not committed serious fallacies. And I'll leave it at that. And I show examples of everybody that I can think of and find. And when I do a face-to-face class, they're posted for them to watch as videos, but not everybody avails themselves of that. And not everybody who watches them pays attention.
You think?
But anyway, so this is a course on critical thinking, right?
Okay.
It's a critical thinking course, and Dr. Cohen wrote a great book. It's got 9 chapters in it, of which I think 8 deal with fallacies. It's either 7 or 8 of them deal with fallacies, and it's either I think it's the last 2 chapters deal with how to work that into your life. The first 7 are different kinds of fallacies. And we're here in November of a course that started in August and ends in the early part of December. And the student says to me in the email, I don't really understand what a fallacy is. What can I do about that? And I confess that my answer was, how about reading the textbook?
Can you open the page 1?
Yeah. Please read your textbook. It's all about fallacies and how to identify them. Please look at the videos.
Did he have a textbook?
It's available free in the course shell.
Okay.
They do not have to buy the textbook. It is provided for them.
Wow. Yeah, but you're forcing somebody to read it. I mean, that's really
true.
Going the distance.
That's true. And unfortunately, it's not available in audio, although that might be something to ponder.
Get it in Audible.
Yeah, get it in an Audible.
Oh, wow.
So
that's amazing. That is amazing. Well, it's funny. Carol and I were watching Channel 12 a few months back, and they really pounding advocacy journalism. We are your news advocates. And, when Carol was at NBC, they had a policy handbook that was about 6 feet tall. And there was an entire chapter on advocacy journalism being a fireable offense. There are no opinions in journalism in the old
there shouldn't
NBC,
be.
The old NBC.
Yeah. It's okay on an editorial page.
Exactly. That's what editorial pages are.
That's exactly what they're for. And so, really, what can I say?
So did the student ever figure out what a fallacy was?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
My goodness.
We'll find out. I didn't get an answer to that one. I also have a great little book called the Illustrated Book of Bad Arguments. That one's really pretty cool as well, and that's also available to students free. There's a link in it. Okay, and I have Alan on line 1. Alan, please, thank you for calling, and what's your question?
Good morning, Rabbi. Rabbi, in regard to your introductory spot, you say that at your temple, all are welcome. Well, I am a Messianic Jew, and I wanted to know how you feel about Messianic Jews. Do you consider them Jews? Because I still participate in all of the Jewish holidays, and the only thing I've done is accepted Jesus Christ. And I feel I'm a completed Jew, but I'd like to know your feeling on Messianic Jews.
Okay, so thank you, Alan, for the question. The question Alan asks is, how do I feel about Messianic Jews? You are, of course, welcome in our synagogue because, as I say in the intro part, everybody is welcome. You are not welcome to proselytize. That's a different issue. I don't allow anybody to proselytize. And as far as how do I view you, I view you as a human being. I do not feel incomplete, but in my religion, there is no role, there is no need for a Jesus. So let's go back and let's look at that. There's a couple of huge differences between Judaism and Christianity. You cross into the Christianity line when your religion becomes about the life, death, and teachings of Jesus. Judaism does not focus on any of that. There's no role for Jesus to play. That's the whole point. You have accepted a concept of original sin and a need to have some God to have God sacrifice somebody to atone for that. And that's not what the role of sacrifices were in biblical days. Sacrifices did not make up for your sins. They were a sign of having repented and made restitution for your sins, so that people were no longer harmed by your actions, and then you celebrated with them usually at a meal where an animal was killed. And it was done not for God, but before God. So I don't know if that makes sense to you or not.
Yes, it does. You've clarified your position very well. The other question I have, if you don't mind, is obviously in Christianity, part of the Christian teaching is that Jesus provides salvation and eternal life. But how do the Jewish people look at death and what happens after death?
Okay, there is not one definitive answer for that, but salvation in Judaism comes directly from God, not from some intermediary, and certainly not from a human having been sacrificed. So that's a huge difference. Judaism, in fact, repudiates the idea of sacrificing, right? Interestingly, we're going to be coming up on that section of Torah, of the book of Genesis, very shortly in the readings that we do. And Abraham is stopped from sacrificing his child by the angel who screams and says, "Don't do that. Don't waste him." Right? That's not usually translated that way. It's usually "don't harm him." But the Hebrew says, "Don't make of him a waste." And I think that's pretty profound. Okay, so for Jews, we believe the soul is eternal. So, eternal life is already there. It's within you. And it's simply a returning to the source. What we don't know is how that shapes out. I don't personally think it's a bunch of cute little things with wings sitting on puffy clouds. First of all, I live too long in Arizona, and there's far too many months without clouds. Same in Jerusalem. But too many months without cute puffy clouds. So, I don't take that. The idea of heavens is actually kind of an interesting Buddhist concept, Hindu Buddhist concept, with their 7 levels.
Wait a minute, back up.
There's far too much. There's too much movement up and down the Silk Road, where ideas like these traveled along with the pots and the pans.
Oh, you keep going back to that Silk
Road. I keep
Road.
going back to that Silk Road because it's so important. So important. And, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a concept. And if it answers questions that people need, I guess here's the bottom line. I'm not worried. My experiences of God personally have been very, very loving and very warm. That doesn't mean that God hasn't, hit me with a divine 2x4 because I was being stubborn and not getting it. And I've had my share of those. But I don't think they were given out of anger, and I don't think they were given out of malice, because when I finally sat down and said, okay, let's think about this. Why am I running into these 2x4s? And, then the answers came. Right? But I had to slow down enough to have that. And interestingly, I can remember one of those distinct times in my life. Things were just really caving in on me. And I stopped in a parking lot. We were camping. Bill was at the motorhome with the dogs. And I had gone out to a store to go buy a couple of things that we needed. And I sat in that parking lot probably for an hour, trying to just get my head wrapped around what was it that I was not understanding in life. And came out of it with some answers and made some changes in my life.
Wow.
And so I've had some of those profound things. Now, I guess for some folks they would couch that in their sacred story. For me, it was just me and God talking in the hills of West Virginia. West by God, Virginia.
Yes.
And it's beautiful country. It's absolutely spectacular country. If you can put up with winters that are beyond description. So Alan, not to make light, I'm not making light in any way of the things that you're saying. Judaism says the soul is eternal. The soul is, if you will, a chip off the old block, kind of a light-handed way of saying we're all part of God. The soul is still part and connected to God. It's pure. We are the ones who kind of like mangle it, and but when all is said and done, we get to fix our errors. So it's a good reason not to make any more errors than you have to in life, and and then the soul is eternal. It returns to the source from whence it came.
And Rabbi, I really appreciate your time and answer to the question, and I wish you all the best, and I say l'chaim.
Thank you, Alan. And back to you as well. L'chaim. May you have a great life.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, good call. Yeah.
So,
340-1590,
340-1590. And we have another one.
The rabbi is in business.
Okay, and it is Ask a Rabbi. And who do we have on line 3? Steve, thank you for calling. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. we've talked before, and I've appreciated talking with you, so that's a good thing. My question would be, I've listened to you. I catch you every once in a while I'm driving, and that's what I'm doing right now. But
be safe.
What bothers me is, for the question point of view, from what I get, is basically everything that you believe is more from a subjective point of view. It's not objective. Everything is subjective. How I feel, how that makes me feel. Is that what true faith is?
I don't know that my faith is subjective. I mean, at one level, you're right. Everything is subjective because here's the bottom line, right? We choose to believe what we want to be true. And that's so Steve's question was, is religion, is faith, is reality subjective? And so here's the question that I start out many of my classes from, only to discover that other professors at IRC do the same. But I ask for a volunteer, and the students are always leery, but there's usually one or two who'll be brave. And I know that I've done it with Greg. Tell me something that you really know. Tell me something you know. He's nodding his head because he remembers this.
Yeah, I do remember it.
Right. And, and it'll start out with something as simple as the sky is blue or whatever. And I don't care what the item is, because the question then is, how do you know? And you'll sometimes get an answer. And how do you know? How do you know? How do you know? And by the third or fourth time you ask, how do you know? The person starts to realize the reality, we don't know. We don't know anything. We have accepted what we have been told. We have accepted what has been modeled for us. And when we get back to that sun, or let me put it this way, we have agreed. We have to agree on things because we have to function. And so we have to act as if what we believe is in fact true. So we have agreed that something we've agreed to call the sun does something we've agreed to call rising in a direction that we've agreed to call east at a time we've agreed to call morning. But all of those are
what I'm thinking is, okay, go ahead.
All of those are arbitrary agreements. Because the reality is the sun doesn't rise. We rotate.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking is, if God is truth, God is love, God will not leave us to our own understanding. And once I step into a subjective reasoning, your reasoning is no better than mine. And what you call, you as you advertise, let your come and join us and let your real Judaism or whatever come to fruition.
Renew your inner Jew is what we say.
Yeah. And what I'm saying is
rejuvenate.
That's kind of a really ambiguous statement. I mean, and from the standpoint of religion, and I know you just defined that the soul was something that you didn't know how it existed beyond now. But Judaism was built on Old Testament ceremonialisms, and I know I've done some research on what you call reform. So Judaism doesn't really exist in the world right now at all. It doesn't exist because there is no high priesthood. There's no holy of holies. There's none of anything. So, in a sense, from your point of view, you rejected Moses and Abraham and basically most of the Torah. So this subjective faith you have, why would I want to share it with someone when if it's subjective, when God is going to be the one that puts the thought into individuals, if that makes sense? Why should I worry about telling?
Steve, let me recap because the folks on Facebook don't hear you. But what you and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but what I hear you saying is that Judaism doesn't exist because we don't have a temple in Jerusalem anymore. and and how can we share something that's subjective? And so I'm going to answer that with a couple of things. One, Judaism existed before the temple. Certainly, from the time of Abraham's considered the first Jew. The temple was a nice to have because the people wanted it. And yes, there was ritual associated with it, but it didn't make for salvation. It was simply a ritual way of celebrating things. It didn't. The high priest was a wonderful ceremonial kind of showman. And what was the function of the Kohen? What you're translating as priest, and in some ways that fuzzies things because of the way that the word priest is used today. So the Kohen was the person who went and checked you when you had leprosy to see if it was contagious. The Kohen was the one who helped you come back into community when you healed from infectious diseases, which is kind of significant while we're going through this pandemic, right? The Kohen was the one that you went to when you had fits of rage about your partner, usually a male about his wife, and who amazingly produced a wife who survived drinking water, the bitter water, right? And if you read the description of what was the bitter water, you realize that there wasn't anything about it that was, it's a glass of water with a little bit of dust from the inside of the temple. Not gonna
symbol, yeah.
It's a symbol, right? And what was said of that water? If you drink it and you're innocent, then you will become pregnant. And if you are guilty, then your thighs and belly will fall off from you at this moment. Now, we know that drinking water, even with dust, is not likely to make parts of your body disembowel. And what is...
So Twiggy is nowhere to be found.
So,
in the Torah.
not that kind of Twiggy.
I got you, okay.
Right, so, if you read that description, what you realize about it was that this was a way for a family to come together, whether or not she had been unfaithful. Hopefully they would come together and she would become pregnant, because that might have been part of the issue. It might have been that she, who knows what the issues were. Certainly when you walked up to the temple grounds, you were carrying a significant sacrifice. A sacrifice is a meal that's shared, and when you walk up with the one of that particular kind, the outside Levites and Kohanim would recognize instantly why you were coming, and they would separate the man and the woman and get the stories from each of them. And I'm sure that they talked in the background, and they basically found a way to repair it.
I understand those points of view, but just as a question, a yes or no question, from the establishment of Judaism, the Ten Commandments were very important, right? I mean, this was a mainstay. This was a foundational block to create a relationship with God.
The relationship existed before, when Moses gets the tablets, the 10 utterances. They don't create Judaism.
No, okay, that's not what I said. In a relationship. That was a relationship to Judaism. And here's my outtake, and you can that if our relationship is with a Creator, and God is impersonal, then it doesn't matter whether God exists or not. But if, as a foundation relationship that's been established by the Ten Commandments, that there is no other God and you should worship no other God, then there comes a point where our opinions have consequences. And our consequences are this, is that we can have a worship within the guidelines of a Creator, or we can have a relationship with worshiping His creation. Subjective reasoning puts the creation ahead of the Creator. And see, that's where I think a loving God couldn't leave us and let us lay. So that's just my understanding. You know,
Okay.
that's where I've come from.
So again to address Steve again for Facebook, because my understanding of what you're saying is that God is the creator, and I totally agree with that. And you say if God is impersonal, in other words, if God created the world and left, then it doesn't really matter, and I agree with that. And then you said that if we don't worship God as the creator, then and I'm
our
losing.
only option is to elevate the creation, human beings, as the important factor in our relationship with God and people.
So you said if we don't worship God, then we worship God's creation, and you're saying now that that's human beings. Okay, so and yeah, that's not we should not worship human beings. Absolutely, Torah says that. Don't attach my name to things that are vanity. Don't make it about yourself. Right? Don't attach me to things that are vanity. In other words, don't make the world about you. And that's what Judaism teaches. And the Ten Commandments are 10 utterances. We actually don't call them commandments. We in English you kind of have to because it's not real easy. But the real word is utterances, 10 dibrot, the 10 things that God said.
They're actually letters, not actually all commands in a way. So
well, no, they're not letters. The first one is Anochi Elohim. I am. Right, I am God. Right, which okay, that's cool. I'm not sure. That's not an instruction to do something.
Well, I understand all that, and I appreciate your time. And I don't want to just take up all your time.
No, it's okay, Steve. I appreciate you calling.
Okay.
So, I think that Judaism, first of all, Judaism is a seeking religion. And that's an important piece. We don't tell people what you find. What we do is help people learn how to seek. And what are you seeking? You're seeking a God experience in your life. You're seeking that presence, the Shekhinah, that God's presence in your life, so that you can feel connected to all that is. And so, we don't bless the bread. We thank God for the blessing of the bread. Right? It's a very important. It's in there in the English, but people don't get it. Blessed are you who created the bread, right? So it's an acknowledgement of God's blessings. And I usually translate it this way: a source of blessing are you, God, for having given us bread. Right?
Well, I think we both can agree that from the standpoint, as we look at humanity, there is more ability for untruth than there is for truth, because there's more options to untruth than there are to truth. Truth stands alone. And to distinguish between truth and untruth, or good or bad, or good or evil, there has to be a standard.
I agree with that.
So therefore,
okay.
if
Steve?
deception is so far out of our reach sometimes because we can't see the truth, it just blinds
right.
us.
Well, Maimonides says the only thing we can know about God is that we can't know God. And so, the invitation is not to know God, but to experience God. And I'm getting a message too. No? Oh, okay. Yeah, and so here's a piece. Okay, here's a big piece, Steve. And there is a truth, and I will share something that Rabbi Daniel Siegel of Vancouver, actually Hornby Island. He now lives on Hornby Island. But he was one of my mentors, and he said this way. He said, we often talk to God, and we call that prayer. It's very common. Sometimes we yell and scream at God. We might rail against God. We might do many things from us to God. And every once in a while, we think we hear God. He says, and there's a challenge in that. Sometimes when we hear God, it's really our own ego. It's the little g God inside us that's trying to make us bigger than we are. How do we know when it's the big G God, when it's the real God? And he said he doesn't really have a profound answer for that, but the best answer that he's been able to work out is that when you look around and you see God's spark in everyone, including the people you can't stand, then the odds are that's God. If the experience you're having is telling you that you're somehow better or more something or other than everybody else around you, that is probably your little g God talking. Okay, that's your ego.
And they're politicians.
Well, we're not even going to touch that
Oops.
one. You keep going there. Right. So the invitation is to see. There's a great line that Chazan's Steve Clapper put in a song that I love called, and you can Google it and find it on YouTube, "Ain't No Child." And it's a wonderful song. I know I've played it for the people here in the studio. And there's a line in his song that resonates with me. And some people have gotten very angry with me for liking that line. But the line in it is, "Ain't no religion better than all the others, long as you see God in every face that you behold." And
makes perfect sense.
And it makes perfect sense. Right? We are all God's creation. And here's my motto, Steve. Here's what I live by. God does not make junk. Period. End of statement. No ifs, ands, or buts. No qualifications. God does not make junk. Because that doesn't make any sense for me. Okay? That means that God makes people, human beings, whether they are challenged by height, like I am, whether they are challenged by other issues. And so here's a piece. You talked, it wasn't you, but I'm blending speakers now, talking about the 10 utterances, right? There's a line in there that people horribly misunderstand. And it's the line that says, it's usually translated, "I shall take into account the sins of the father to the third and fourth generations." And I shall visit is what usually people translate that as. And really what the Hebrew word is poked. I will take an accounting of the sins of the parents for 3 or 4 generations. Now let me parse that for you. Let me work with that a little bit for a moment. What does that mean? If your parent was an alcoholic, you have certain behavior markers, such as wanting to control things, lying, braggadocio, in ways that children of non-alcoholics don't have. That's psychology. We've learned a lot about that. And it takes a couple of generations to work that out. Right? So, it's going to... Okay? And that's what that means. In other words, God's going to say, okay, if you're the adult child of an alcoholic, and you have a tendency to lie, I kind of understand that. Because your addicted parent lied all the time. And what behavior was modeled for you was lying. The other thing that we know about addicts is an extreme need to control because they can't control themselves. And so they take that energy and they try to control everything else to make it work out for them. And so we see those behaviors in the children. There's a great book out there, and I don't remember who the author is, but it's Adult Children of Alcoholics. And it talks about the kinds of behaviors that we see among children who were raised in a home where a parent was an active addict. And because of the things that addiction does, it so distorts healthy behavior. And I once had a therapist. I did some work with alcoholism and addictive behaviors, and this therapist described it this way. He said he tries to do role play with clients that he works with, and he'll have one person being the enabler for the alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever you're addicted to, and what he has the addict do is stare at a cabinet that has the object of the addiction. And the only thing that addict does is stare at the cabinet. And the enabler gets invited to parties, but of course they can't come because the addict's staring at the right? And so you see all these kinds of behaviors that enablers do. Addicts can't function well without an enabler. They need somebody to run as an intermediary. And somebody...
I've always liked the saying that I've never told a lie in my life, and that's the first lie.
Yeah, if somebody tells you they've never lied, don't believe anything else they say. Yeah,
and my
got
dad
it.
used to say that if there's a place that has perfect people, I can't go there because I'll mess it up.
Yep, I hear you. I agree with that, Steve. Yeah. You know. So I'll give you an alternative to that. We are all perfectly human.
Yeah.
And each of us has things to learn. And so here let's flip into a little bit of my personal theology. I think that part of our job is to face challenges, to learn what it takes to overcome them. And somehow in that learning, we achieve something that God needs. And that we have agreed, that's a Jewish concept, we have agreed to take on these challenges. We are shutafim, we are volunteers, we are participants in our lives. And so each of us has a bunch of different challenges. And, you know, the weird version of that is God doesn't give you anything you can't handle. That's the weird version of it. The reality is that's not meant for you to do alone. Okay, so you can handle things.
The consistency of your belief is pretty similar in a way to what Christians assume as the Holy Spirit.
Well, and Judaism would say that
guiding
is in
your
all of us.
lives, and so
Yeah.
there is a similarity there between what you believe and what Christianity offers as what is finding truth and for understanding God and the relationship that you have. Like you say, it's not maybe worship, it's relationship, and it's understanding. So I've got to go now, but I thank you for the time. We'll talk some other time.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for calling. Appreciate it. And so, Steve, I think you're right. To the last comment that you made, I think you're right. I think all religions are about how to be a better person, how to live in community, and how to seek the creator of the one universe, right? All religions, I can't think of any that don't posit one God as creator. I can't think of any. I can think of many religions that have
different gods.
Well, they don't.
Right?
They have incarnations of that one God.
Okay.
Okay, right? So if you look at Hinduism, right? Hinduism has parivar. They have groups of incarnations of the one supreme being. And dear Catholic in front of me, can you think of any other religions with incarnations? He's shaking his head.
Shirley MacLaine comes to mind.
Right, you know, and so
no, yeah,
right, you know, that might be one of the, and Judaism's not the only religion that does this, but Judaism says rather than try to deal with that, let's try to connect to the source, to the one, and the source of life, the source of all being, the creator. And that's probably the biggest difference. We say we don't need an incarnation. We don't need an intercessory of any type. We can go directly. And we're not the only ones that's intermediary. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, we don't need that. We are, in our purest moments, able to glimpse that reality of the one who is the source of life. And so when I take that and I try to work through it, what I say to people is God is the force, the energy, the reason why you breathe. The reason why you breathe. It's what separates the living from the dead, that God spark. And everything else is a function of what you seek and what you experience. You know, at the very basis, God is that energy. And then you can take it from there, whether or not your experience of that God is a God who created and went off somewhere else and isn't really, you know, a conscious being. My personal experience says...
That would be a false God.
Well, I don't know that I wouldn't say that's a false God. That to you is a God with whom you don't connect. Okay, I don't think that's God's doing. I think that's the human being. You haven't gotten there yet. You haven't had an experience yet of God. We have what we call Bria moment. This is not at all what I was going to do today. Okay. What else is new? We have what we call a Bria moment. Right. A Bria moment is a creation within ourselves and within the universe of a connection, and it's those fleeting instances, because they're not even minutes. They're probably much less than that, where you see the continuum of life and existence from one end to the other, and you understand your role in it, and it's crystal clear for that instant, and poof, as soon as you realize you're doing it, you're out of it. But you usually come out of it with some inspiration, some clue, something you needed. And most of the time, okay, now I'm going to go into my own, and people, once they have one of those experiences, they try to recreate it over and over, because it, from my own experience, it's an endorphin rush, man. Right? I was enough of a scientist.
It's your aha moment.
It's an aha moment, and you might have one, you might have many, but people try to repeat them and create those kinds of moments in life, and so we seek them. But it's an endorphin kind of response. The heart rate is up. There's a feeling of goodness, of not euphoria, but that kind of positive float in your body, and usually the vision is it's not of this world. And yet it is, right? So and so you start to get into these mystical kind of terms, and we see it in Ezekiel, the wheels within the wheels that turn and don't turn, right? It was a color as if a color of. When you start to see that kind of language, the problem we get into is that language is very finite, and it often is wrong. It's an approximation, and we try to work around it, and that's where we get to, So, it was kind of like gold against a purple, kind of, right? Because it's not a color of this world. It's not the same purple as I might grab paint and put on. And so, those are mystical experiences, and they're very deep and profound. And we call some of those Bria moments, those moments where you get it. And I can remember distinctly sitting in Tucson, talking with a survivor, a Holocaust survivor, who was very, very angry with God, angry with Germans, angry with a lot of stuff. Now, I'm the children of survivors, so I get some of that, right? And I've got a little bit, I'm sure I've got some spiritual PTSD that makes me, never mind. We'll talk about that some other time. But I was working with this person, and I was describing this kind of Bria moment, because of their intense anger at God. And the guy looked at me and he said, I had one of those. I said, tell me about it. Because that's what I usually say to things like that. And he relayed to me that he had had an experience when he was about 4 or 5 years old. People had been visiting all day, and stuff was starting to happen in Germany. And he had one of those moments, and in that moment he knew that most of his family was not going to survive, but that he was.
Whoa.
And
God.
and so he got that zing out of that moment. And because he was a child, he didn't know how to communicate it or what to do with it. And it wasn't until we talked that he remembered having had that experience so many years before. And it was another couple of years until his family was rounded up. And in fact, he was the only survivor. And part of what he was feeling, of course, was survivor guilt. And what talking about that did for him was that it allowed him to transform his experience from one of anger and broiling over to one of teaching people why it's important to not allow genocides and ethnic cleansing anywhere. Eugenics is not a godly program. And I'll leave it at that. That's humans. Getting back to this discussion of some of the people before, something like eugenics or ethnic cleansing is a human being asserting themselves as God. Let God sort it out. Let God decide how and where the world should go. Our job is to treat each other with as much respect and as much dignity as we can possibly muster. And, yes.
Yet there are people in the world, you see a lot of, especially in the East, where they almost view themselves as God.
There are always people who view themselves as God. We don't have to go that far. Right?
Okay.
I'm
I
sure.
gotcha.
I'm sure
okay.
you know many of them nearby.
Yeah, well,
some
that's
nearby
true.
and some not so near.
That's true too. Yeah.
Right? There are people who are so solipsistic. And yes, that's one of those
Whoa, wait a minute.
75-cent words. Solipsistic.
I have never heard that word.
You got to look that one up. Solipsistic.
Solipsistic.
Means everything revolves around you. You are the universe, and nothing matters after you.
Wow.
There is a term for that, right? And I recognize that that's one of those 75-cent words that most people don't know. I actually learned it kind of an interesting way, which was that somebody once called up to a program similar to this and said, "Hey, I'm solipsistic. I realize that, but," and I'm like, okay, so when you say I realize it, but, that means you're we've got some yes buts going on there, right? You know it's wrong, but you're still going to do it because.
But I'm perfect.
Yeah.
Oh,
and so I actually had to look up the word. There are many words that I have to look up, and so I retained that one, partially because of the discussion. But, yeah. And so there are people who are very much self-centered. That's the easier word, right? The world does revolve around them, and nothing else matters in their lives. And that's a fallacy, clearly. But it is the way that these people operate. And, again, God understands that we have alcoholic parents. God understands that we, alcoholic/addicted parents. All of us have different addictions. And I've been accused of having learning be one of my addictions. And I think that's probably true. So
a lifelong student?
A lifelong student, absolutely. And so I really do. There's the music, folks. So we're at the end of this Ask a Rabbi. Thank you to everyone who called in. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Alan. And thank you all for listening. Thank you for being here on Facebook. It is one God who creates one universe. And don't forget our plant sale on Sunday. Thank you, God, for taking the hurricane away from us. But at the Parks and Rec Center off of Onerosa, just north of Port St. Lucie Boulevard, from 2 to 5 on Sunday. Please, admission is free. Come see the great plants that people have been raising just for you to find and take home. Our plant sale. Thank you.
WPSL, Port St. Lucie.